Hi, my name is Euphemia, and 3 days ago, my sister stood on a stage and called me a fraud, in front of a room full of people I once thought were family. But that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was realizing it hadn't started that night. It had started years before, in the way they left my name out of programs, out of photos, out of conversations, until even I started wondering if maybe I didn't belong. Now they say it was a misunderstanding. But how do you misunderstand someone you erased on purpose? Want to know what happened when I finally stopped whispering? The envelope was cream-colored, heavy in texture, but empty in weight. It had the kind of embossed seal that was supposed to signal prestige, tradition, family. But when I saw the return address, my sister's handwriting, neat, dramatic, I already knew it wasn't a gesture of kindness. It was a formality. I peeled it open at the kitchen counter. The knife clinked against the tile as I unfolded the card inside. Please join the Cybele family for the annual Hope and Honor Gala. My name? Miss E. Cross. Cross, not Cruz. Not even close enough to pretend it was a typo. I let the card fall back into the envelope. It fluttered down to the floor like something already expired. They only remembered me when the photos would look incomplete. 3 nights later, I stood in front of the grand staircase leading into the Art Institute's modern wing. I didn't bother to adjust the hem of my dress. If it was wrinkled from the ride over, so be it. I hadn't been sent the dress code anyway. Inside, the lights hit like cameras, bright, merciless. I walked past 2 event staff who offered polite nods but didn't check the list. Maybe I wasn't on it. Odessa, my mother, spotted me from across the room. Her wave was a flick of fingers, barely a breeze. Then she turned and placed her full attention back on Marla. Marla was mid-laugh, perfectly staged in her sapphire gown, already owning the crowd. People circled her like moths that didn't realize the flame would always stay cold. No one came over. Not my father, not a cousin. Not even the people who used to call me Mini Marla, back when the family still spoke of me in terms that implied I mattered. I made my way toward the champagne table, trying not to look like I was retreating. A man I vaguely recognized from a charity board nodded at me, but didn't seem to place who I was. "Oh, that's family," he mumbled to the woman beside him when she asked. Not a name, not a role, just family. And not one of them corrected him. When I finally found my seat, table 17, tucked behind a pillar, halfway to the service corridor, I stopped cold. The name card read, E. Cross. Of course it did. Apparently, I was easier to manage when I stayed close to the waiters. I could hear Marla's laugh drift across the ballroom like a ribbon tied too tight. The guests around my table were lovely, kind even, but they weren't family. They weren't supposed to be my people. And I wasn't supposed to be theirs. Someone made a toast from the main stage. A name I didn't recognize was called out and applauded. Meanwhile, no one looked in my direction, not even when the spotlight passed my table by mistake. I reached for my glass of water, held it up, and took a slow sip. No wine was offered. I hadn't been listed as a guest of the family. I'd RSVP'd under my own name, paid for my own plate. Paid for half the event, actually. But you wouldn't have known that from the way Marla kept curating her audience. Every time she introduced someone, she dropped our last name like a brand, but one I no longer belonged to. She wore the Cybele name like armor. I wore mine like silence. The evening crawled forward. Plates clinked, speeches droned, laughter exploded in the distance, and I just sat there, watching. Not angry, not hurt, exactly. Just confirmed. Funny. They invited me to the gala, but forgot to include me in the family. And yet, I was the one who paid for half of it, without my name on anything. I sat through 2 more speeches before Marla took the mic. Her heels echoed confidently across the stage, each step perfectly timed to the instrumental background that had been carefully selected for maximum grace. The room hushed, not out of reverence, but habit. My sister always commanded attention, whether or not she deserved it. She reached the podium, scanned the crowd like she was handpicking who would matter tonight, and offered that flawless smile she practiced in the mirror growing up. I knew it too well. That was the one she used when she was about to pretend she was everyone's favorite daughter. "Welcome on behalf of the Cybele family," she began. "Myself, my parents, Wallace and Odessa, and our incredible supporters. Thank you for being here tonight." That was it. Not a pause, not a sideways glance, not a single syllable in the direction of the only person in the room who'd written the largest check. I didn't flinch. I didn't look at my mother. I didn't even blink. I just stared ahead, like I wasn't waiting for anything. The cameras panned slowly. The screen behind Marla projected a soft slideshow, portraits of our family, staged at last year's gala. Odessa, Wallace, Marla, center frame. I was missing in every single photo. The final frame came up, honoring the Cybele legacy. 3 generations of community leadership. 3, my grandmother, my mother, my sister. That was the math they used when subtracting me from their equation. A waiter brushed past me with a tray of oysters. I didn't move. My breath stayed even, controlled, like I'd been trained not to disrupt anything. That's what I had been taught. Blend in, don't embarrass them, be agreeable until you're invisible. I must have learned that lesson too well. After the applause quieted, Odessa leaned slightly toward me, her voice a soft hum under the buzz of clinking forks. "Let's not make this about you," she murmured. "Please don't embarrass Marla." It was a request disguised as concern, but what it really meant was, "We've already decided who matters tonight. Don't cause trouble." I didn't answer. Instead, I studied the edge of my napkin. Clean, pressed, folded to perfection. Like me, sitting here in tailored silence. What would happen if I stood up and reminded the room who paid for the sound system, the catering, the signage, the wine they were sipping like it poured from heaven? They wouldn't believe it. Or worse, they'd believe it and still pretend they hadn't heard. Because when people look past you on purpose, they're not being negligent. They're being precise. I leaned back in my chair and opened my phone under the table. Scrolled through photos from the last project I funded in Guatemala, classroom walls being painted, kids in new shoes, a nurse holding donated supplies. I wasn't in most of the shots, just my initials on the boxes, EC. I'd gotten used to that too, being the unseen part of something good. But something about tonight felt different. Not like a wound, but a pulse. Across the room, Marla was basking in praise, thanking donors for their generosity with a warmth she rarely used on family. She made eye contact with a senator's wife and whispered something that made the woman laugh too loudly. Then, like choreography, Odessa excused herself to the restroom, no doubt to take a call or prep her next performance. Wallace hadn't looked my way once. He was busy talking to a bank executive about some investment partnership like nothing else existed outside that deal. I stood quietly and adjusted my dress. The sequins near the hem caught the light, not enough to draw attention, but enough to remind me I wasn't wearing this for them. As I stepped toward the edge of the ballroom, a middle-aged man in a velvet blazer touched my arm. "Excuse me," he said, glass in hand. "Could you let the Cybele rep know the champagne's warm?" His smile was polite, his assumption casual. He thought I was part of the staff. I gave him a nod. "Of course," I said softly. Then I turned and walked toward the service hallway, not because I worked there, but because I needed a moment away from the glare of artificial grace. Inside, the staff were prepping the next course. A young woman looked up at me. "You okay?" she asked. I smiled back, but not with the kind of smile Marla wore on stage. "I'm fine, just checking on something." I pulled out my phone again. One email sat in drafts, addressed to the Gala board. Subject line, Clarity Foundation Sponsorship Verification. I didn't hit send. Not yet. But I reread the first line. "This is to confirm that the majority sponsorship for this event was provided directly by Euphemia Cruz, independent of the Cybele family estate." I saved the draft, locked the screen, and exhaled. It wasn't the first time I'd been mistaken for someone who didn't belong, and it wouldn't be the last time someone handed me the bill, then claimed they threw the party. After tucking the folded sponsorship agreement back into my clutch, I didn't return to my table. I needed air, not the outdoor kind, but a break from being stared through like I was made of glass. Instead of heading toward the main ballroom, I veered right, toward the cocktail area. Less formal, dimmer lighting, quieter conversations. It was where donors and socialites mingled with the kind of polished nonchalance you only see at events like this. Everyone there had mastered the art of pretending to be interested in someone else's cause, just long enough to sip free bourbon. And that's where I saw her. Trina Ballard. Long dark hair pinned into a loose knot. Designer heels I recognized from a joint online shopping spree we'd done on her couch 10 years ago, and a voice that hadn't changed a bit. Warm, performative, and just loud enough to carry. She was standing next to Marla. Of course she was. A tray of bruschetta passed between us, giving me a few more seconds to decide whether to walk away or keep pretending I wasn't surprised. But I knew what that would look like. Me, retreating again. Me, avoiding conflict for the sake of keeping things easy. Not this time. I stepped closer. Trina spotted me first. Her eyes lit up with that well-rehearsed brightness that says, "Oh, I didn't expect to see you. But now that you're here, let's pretend we're still good." "Yuffie, my God, it's been forever." I gave her a slow nod. 8 years, give or take. Last time was your cousin's baby shower, right? Was it? Gosh, time. She reached out and gave my arm a quick squeeze, the kind of touch that says, I remember just enough to seem sincere, but not enough to actually care. Marla, who had been mid-conversation with someone in a navy blazer, turned her head, flashed that default Sibel smile, and quickly returned to her guest. I didn't expect her to engage. She wouldn't risk it, especially not in front of someone she still needed to impress. Trina lowered her voice. "Hey, I saw you earlier. Just didn't want to interrupt anything." "Like what?" I asked. "My quiet dinner next to the catering exit?" She laughed awkwardly. "Come on, it's not like that." I didn't say anything. I wanted her to feel the gap, not just in our conversation, but in our friendship, the one I had held together for years until I got tired of pretending I couldn't see who she was really standing next to. She glanced around and sipped her drink. "This event's bigger than last year. Marla's been working overtime. Honestly, she's done a lot for the family's image lately. She's really pulled it together." "For whose benefit?" I asked, and let the question hang there just long enough to get uncomfortable. Trina gave me a tight smile. "Optics matter, Yuffie. You know that. Especially with all the press. Sometimes people say things just to, shift attention." "What things?" She glanced down. The fraud comment." "Ah, so that's what this was. A cleanup job." "I had to smooth things over earlier," she added quickly. "It wasn't personal. It was just part of the plan." I tilted my head. "You helped write the spin, didn't you?" She hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. "It wasn't malicious. It was survival. I mean, I work under Marla now. I can't exactly take sides." "You didn't have to take sides, Trina," I said, my voice low but steady. "You just had to not make me the problem." "You knew it wasn't true," I added. Trina didn't argue. Her eyes softened just slightly, and she shrugged with an apology she didn't say out loud. "I also knew not denying it would keep me employed," she finally murmured. There it was. The real answer. Some debts aren't paid in dollars. They're paid in quiet betrayals, in withheld truths, in letting someone else take the fall to keep your own ladder steady. I didn't feel rage. I felt done. "Anyway," she said, trying to pivot, "I'm glad you're here. It's nice to see your face again." I gave her the kind of smile people use when they've stopped needing closure. "I'm sure it is." Then I stepped away. This wasn't a confrontation. It was confirmation. I took the long route around the room, letting the noise blur behind me. Conversations bled together. Someone called out a toast. Another round of laughter broke out at a corner table. All of it felt like an echo of the same performance I'd been watching since I was 20. I paused near the hallway just outside the main event area. A gallery wall had been repurposed for gala history, photos framed in gold trim, plaques celebrating annual donors. And there, dead center, was a photo from 3 years ago. Marla, Odessa, Trina, standing under a banner that read, "Hope and Honor, in partnership with the Clarity Foundation." No mention of my name. No mention of who created the foundation. Just perfectly staged pride. That's when it hit me. This wasn't the first time they'd done this. They'd been rewriting the story for years. Not aggressively, not loudly, but consistently. And I had let them. Every time I stayed quiet. Every time I told myself, it's not worth the fight. I reached into my purse, found the folded page I'd been carrying all night. The official sponsorship agreement, signed, dated, notarized. My name at the bottom. No co-signers, no representatives. Only me. I unfolded it, stared at the signature. The ink had barely faded. It felt recent, still warm, not yet, but soon. I folded the agreement and tucked it back inside my clutch, slipping quietly into the shadows off the side of the ballroom. I didn't need a seat right now. I needed position, the kind that doesn't come from title or title card. From where I stood near the staging wall, I could finally see the printed program projected onto the screen above the stage. For the first time that night, my name appeared. Donor Spotlight, Euphemia Cruz. It sat there like a whisper on the corner of a shout. I didn't smile. I didn't move. I just fixed the clasp on my purse, stood taller, and waited. The MC, a polished man in his early 50s, who had been hosting this event for years, began his lead-in. I knew the rhythm. I had helped write this part of the script when I funded the previous year's version. And now, he began, we take a moment to recognize the extraordinary generosity of a very special contributor. He never got to finish. Marla walked straight onto the stage. Not hurried, not hesitant. She moved like she owned the floor, like she believed this moment belonged to her. The room offered a scattered clap, unsure whether this was planned or not. Marla reached the mic and adjusted it slightly, just enough to break the MC's stride. He stepped back, visibly confused, but too polite to interrupt. "I just want to clarify something before we move on," she said, voice calm, even sweet. The kind of tone you use when you're about to say something sharp, but you want to coat it in charm first. "There seems to be some misunderstanding," she continued, scanning the crowd, her eyes gliding past mine like I wasn't standing 10 feet from her. "Our family is incredibly proud of this event, and it's important that everyone here knows who made this night possible." My stomach tightened. "There have been misleading claims," she said, pausing just long enough for the room to lean in, "about who's really behind tonight's sponsorship." I felt every spine in the room straighten. Forks stilled. Glasses hovered midair. Marla turned slightly toward my direction. Not enough to name me, but enough to mark me. A gesture dressed up as a shrug. "Some people like attention," she said lightly, "but this foundation doesn't endorse false narratives. Let's be clear, the real contributors are already on this stage." Silence. One long, hollow silence. I could hear my pulse in my ears, but my face didn't move. I stood exactly as I had before. No step forward, no retreat. The MC looked like he'd swallowed his own cue cards. He opened his mouth, but then shut it. My father shifted in his seat, cleared his throat, but never looked at me. My mother stared straight ahead, her lips pressed into a tight line. She wasn't angry about the lie. She was worried about the fallout. Marla stood there, still smiling, hands folded neatly in front of her. She had rehearsed this. She had waited for this exact moment, to say just enough to plant the doubt, but not enough to be held accountable. And it worked. Whispers rippled through the room, like wind cutting through thin curtains. Some guests turned their heads, pretending to check the decor. Others looked directly at me, eyes quickly darting away when I met their gaze. I didn't move. I didn't owe them any movement. She wanted to erase me, I thought. Not just from the family, from the record. I could have shouted. I could have walked up and corrected her, held up the agreement, forced the MC to confirm the sponsorship. But I didn't. I stood still. I'd learned young that flinching only feeds the story. When you don't react, you force them to finish their lies out loud. I reached into my clutch, fingers brushing against the paper inside. I didn't pull it out. I didn't need to prove anything, not yet. I just needed to feel that it was still there, that the truth hadn't gone anywhere. A tap on the mic signaled the MC's re-entry. He awkwardly thanked Marla for her enthusiasm, then returned to the original script, stumbling slightly over my name when he finally read it. But the damage had been done. I walked slowly along the perimeter of the room, each step deliberate. The conversation started again, forced and fragmented. No one stopped me. No one knew what to say. I paused near the edge of the stage, just long enough for Marla to catch my eye. She didn't blink. Neither did I. That's when I understood something she never had. Power isn't always in the mic. It's in knowing when to wait to take it. I turned, walked away. Not out of weakness, but because the story wasn't finished. Not yet. As I reached the hallway, I could hear someone mutter, "What was that about?" And another respond, "I don't know, but it didn't look good." Exactly. They didn't know, but they were about to. They wanted me erased, but I was about to become unforgettable. As the hallway's murmur faded behind me, I made my way along the outer edge of the ballroom, weaving between tables like a shadow. No one noticed. They were still digesting Marla's little correction, still unsure whether to clap, whisper, or pretend nothing had happened. I didn't stop at my table. Instead, I slipped past the bar and into a narrow alcove behind the projection booth. There, among the coils of audio cables and half-drunk water bottles, sat Lauren, the AV assistant I had spoken to 2 weeks prior. He looked up, startled. "I thought you might show up," he said under his breath. "I hope you still have the original file," I replied, my voice steady. He tapped a few keys, glancing back toward the stage. "They swapped it at the last minute," he said. "Marla's team gave us a revised version, cut everything from overseas. No field footage, no voiceover, just the ribbon cutting and donor photos." I didn't flinch. "You still have the real one?" He nodded. "Loaded and ready." I handed him a flash drive. "Overlay the audio. Run it when they start the donor reel." Lauren hesitated. "You sure you want to do this?" "I'm not here to make noise," I said, "just to restore what they edited out." He nodded again and turned back to the console. I stepped back into the darkness, unseen. Back on stage, the MC was recovering his rhythm. I heard his voice rise again, the same well-rehearsed cadence he always used before introducing major donors. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, clearing his throat, "before we move into the live auction, we'd like to take a moment to recognize the anonymous benefactor whose support has made tonight's gala not only possible, but transformative." The crowd stirred, puzzled. For 3 years in a row, this individual has given quietly, never once asking to be named. A pause. "But tonight, with her permission, we'd like to finally acknowledge her." The lights dimmed slightly, the screen flickered. Then, he said it. "Euphemia Cruz." "My name," said out loud, clear, deliberate. The spotlight swept across the room until it landed on me. I didn't stand. I didn't wave. I didn't even blink. I just nodded once. The crowd looked around, confused. Some clapped, some didn't. Marla turned her head sharply. Odessa went stiff. Wallace stared at the tablecloth like it owed him money. Then the screen came to life. Not with the doctored version Marla had approved, but with the original footage. Raw and real. The first clip showed me standing under a corrugated metal roof in Guatemala, handing out medical supplies to a nurse. My boots were caked in red dirt. Sweat soaked through the back of my cotton shirt. Next, a scene from a school library in rural Mexico. I was helping unload boxes of books, sitting on the floor with 3 children, teaching them how to pronounce the word oxygen. Then came the meeting with local educators in South Carolina, where we signed a community grant agreement. My signature was front and center. No Sibel logos, no co-chairs, just me. The final clip, a still photograph. Marla, front and center, standing before a Clarity Foundation banner at last year's gala. The caption? Event sponsored by Clarity Foundation. Founder, Euphemia Cruz. Then the screen went black. Silence. You could hear the weight of it, the absence of applause, the shifting of chairs, the breath Marla held in but didn't release. Then came the voiceover, calm, unapologetic. She never asked to be recognized. She only asked to be included. And when they denied her that, she spoke in the only language they understood, proof. The screen lit again, displaying the Clarity Foundation's mission statement, my signature etched in white below it. The house lights came up. The room remained still. Then, slowly, someone started clapping. I didn't turn to see who. Another person joined in, then another, until a small ripple of applause spread through the room. It wasn't thunderous, it wasn't theatrical, but it was enough. Odessa looked pale. Wallace stood and quietly exited. Marla gripped her wine glass so tightly I thought the stem might snap. "We can't spin that," Trina whispered to her, her voice barely audible from where I stood. Marla didn't respond. I rose from my seat, walked calmly toward the stage, not to speak, not to demand anything, but simply to let them see me walk the same path Marla had hijacked. I paused near the bottom step. The MC gestured for me to come up. I shook my head gently. This wasn't my acceptance speech, it was their reckoning. I stood there just long enough for the photographers to capture the moment. Not the one where I was erased, but the one where I stood anyway. They took my name out of the speech. I put it on the screen. I stepped away from the stage before the applause could settle into silence. The energy behind me thinned as I slipped back into the hallway, heels echoing softly on polished stone. The weight of cameras and whispers stayed behind. I wasn't running. I just knew the next part of this story didn't belong in the spotlight. Down the corridor, past a line of florals that no one stopped to admire, a single door stood ajar. The side reception room used for press huddles and staff breaks. It was dim, air thick with event perfume and recycled air. And there she was. Marla stood near the far wall, arms crossed, pacing with the same fury she used to rehearse high school debate arguments. She wasn't crying. Marla never cried unless there was a camera. When she saw me step inside, she froze. "You ambushed me!" she snapped before I said a word. I closed the door behind me. No witnesses, no cameras, just us. "You erased me," I replied, steady. "That came first." She scoffed. "Don't make this dramatic, you had your moment." I pulled my phone from my bag and tapped the screen. The email came up instantly. I turned it toward her. Marla's eyes flicked across the screen. She didn't need to read it twice. She already knew what it said. "Let's keep Euphemia's name off press for continuity." Her message to the foundation team read, "I'll represent the family for photos." The response was curt but complicit. "Approved for now." "I didn't authorize that," I said, "but you sent it anyway." She looked down, then back up. I was trying to protect the family image. "You were living like some recluse, disappearing between continents." "Running a nonprofit," I cut in. "Whatever. People needed clarity, pun not intended. So I gave them something clean to point to." "You didn't borrow my name, Marla," I said slowly. "You stripped it out of the record. You knew it mattered, and you took it off anyway." She crossed her arms tighter. "You think I wanted to be the face of all this? I had no choice." "There's always a choice," I said, "and you made yours." The door creaked open before she could respond. Wallace stepped in. Our father hadn't spoken to me all night. Not once. Not when I entered the ballroom. Not when I was left off the introductions. Not even after my name lit up the screen behind his eldest daughter's face. He looked at me first, then at Marla. "I don't care who's to blame," he said. "What I care about is the press. There are reporters circling, and the last thing this family needs is scandal." He looked directly at me. "So, if this is about you needing acknowledgement, fine. You've been acknowledged. I apologize." The word hung in the air like something he'd choked on. I didn't blink. "That's not an apology," I said calmly. "That's a request for silence." Wallace said nothing, just turned, walked back out the door, and left it ajar behind him. I stared at the open gap, then turned back to Marla. "I don't want the title," I told her, "or the stage, or the brand. What I want, what I'm keeping, is the truth, and I won't let you use my silence again." Her jaw tightened. "Are you going to sue me?" "No," I said, "but the foundation you've been using for image won't carry your name anymore." She narrowed her eyes. "That's not your decision." "It already was," I said. "You just didn't notice I made it." I started to leave. As I stepped past her, she whispered behind me, "You're not as innocent as you pretend." I turned to her one last time. "I never pretended," I said. "But you did." The door clicked shut behind me. Just as I reached the edge of the hallway, my phone buzzed. It was Lorne. He'd just sent a file. I tapped to open it, put my phone to my ear, and listened. Marla's voice came through, unmistakably hers. "If she speaks, make sure it doesn't go live." I stood still for a second. Not surprised, just confirmed. I forwarded the file to Alma, my attorney. No subject line, no explanation. She'd know exactly what to do with it. Marla didn't know it yet. But I'd already spoken. I slipped the phone back into my clutch without breaking stride. The marble floor beneath my heels felt colder now, not because the air had changed, but because everything had. As I approached the far end of the corridor, a man in a dark suit stepped into my path. His badge was discreet: black lanyard, silver lettering, event security. "Ms. Cruz?" he asked, soft-voiced, as though not entirely comfortable addressing me. "We've been asked to escort you to the registration lounge. There's a matter requiring clarification." I nodded once, wordless, followed. They led me through a staff-only hallway, past a catering kitchen where someone was arguing over wine inventory, then into a small office tucked near the Gala's back entrance. The door closed behind us with a quiet thud that said this wasn't routine. Another man waited inside, mid-40s, business formal. He offered no greeting, just a clipped explanation. "We've been contacted by the Chicago Registry Office," he said, looking not quite at me. "An anonymous complaint has been filed, alleging possible misappropriation of donation funds under your name. We're obligated to document the inquiry." I leaned slightly against the table, calm. My voice didn't rise. "That was fast." He blinked. "Excuse me?" "She didn't even wait for dessert to finish," I murmured. "Timing's everything, isn't it?" He glanced at his clipboard again. "The language in the claim is vague, but it's flagged high due to your level of visibility tonight." I nodded. "I'd like to review the report." He hesitated, then turned the sheet toward me. I scanned the page. It didn't say much, just enough to plant a seed. No accusation of fraud, just a vague allusion to possible inconsistencies in financial attribution. I'd seen this tactic before. No blade, just a shadow. I pulled my bag around and removed a folder, handed it over. "That's the Clarity Foundation's latest independent audit," I said. "Third-party verified. Signed off 3 weeks ago." He opened it, flipped pages, his eyebrows lifting slightly. "This looks comprehensive." "It is." The door opened again. Grant Keating, the evening's MC, stepped inside, looking like someone who'd just found himself in the alley of a famidmali's worst-kept secret. "I saw the footage," he said carefully. "The room saw it. It was definitive." "I didn't share it for applause," I replied. "Only truth." He nodded slowly, and for once, didn't have a line to fill the space. I don't need a mic in the next hour, I added. But you'll remember this moment next time someone hands you a name to read, without asking who earned it. Before he could answer, the door cracked again. Loren entered, laptop in hand. His face said it all. Something had shifted. This might matter, he said, eyes on me. He opened the device, turned the screen, and clicked play. Marla's voice came through, clear as a bell. Not angry, just clinical. If she tries to speak again, she said, have security block her. We'll say it's a scheduling conflict. Make it clean. Silence followed. Grant exhaled through his nose. Jesus. She didn't say it to sound cruel, I said. She said it because she expected no one to object. Loren stood awkwardly. Should I delete it? No, I said. Send it to Alma and CC the Board of Trustees for the Cybele Family Trust. He nodded and left the room without another word. Grant adjusted his cufflink. You want this broadcast? No, I said. This isn't about theater, it's documentation. The other security officer turned to me. Do you want to file a formal response? Not tonight, I replied, but you might want to save that recording. It's going to age well. I picked up my folder, nodded to the room, and left. Back in the hallway, the noise from the main event was softer now. Fewer cheers, more quiet talk, the awkward kind that follows a shift in narrative. I stopped near the same floral display I'd passed earlier. Funny how things that felt decorative an hour ago now seemed hollow. My phone buzzed again. Marla, this wasn't supposed to go public. I stared at the screen for a full beat, then typed slowly. Then you shouldn't have spoken. I hovered my thumb over the send button, then paused, and locked the screen. Not everything needed a reply. Some things echoed louder when left unanswered. I returned to the ballroom, not to reclaim a seat, not to join a table, but to walk through a space that had once ignored me, and let it feel my absence now. I didn't need to shout, I just had to stop whispering. The hum of the ballroom faded behind me as I stepped into the cool night air. The sky over Chicago was clear, dark velvet with a hint of wind, the kind that tugs at your sleeves and reminds you to move forward. I didn't rush. There was no need. A black SUV was already waiting out front. I slid into the back seat and gave the driver a quiet nod. As he pulled away from the curb, I looked down at my phone, still dark. No new messages, no apologies, just a single unread text from Alma. Delivered. Signed by all four. You're clear to proceed. I exhaled, not out of relief, but resolution. By the time we reached my building, the lobby was empty, save for the night doorman. He rose slightly from his stool, nodded, then sat back down like he understood this wasn't a night to make small talk. I took the elevator up in silence. In my apartment, the city lights stretched out beyond the windows, like something earned. I placed my clutch on the console, took off my shoes, and stood for a moment on the hardwood floor, letting everything settle, not the noise from the gala, but the quiet that follows when nothing else needs to be said. I poured myself a glass of water, carried it to my desk, and opened the leather folder waiting there. Inside were 9 sealed envelopes, each addressed by hand, already delivered before I left for the gala. 1 to the Board of Trustees, 1 to the event's legal team, 1 each to Wallace and Odessa. Each one contained the same contents: a formal cease and desist letter, a notification of trademark retraction, and a written notice stating that the Clarity Foundation name was no longer to be affiliated, explicitly or implied, with the Cybele family brand. No press releases, no media theatrics, just paper with weight. Some things don't require a stage. They only need a signature, and I had signed them all. Back at the gala, I imagined Marla standing with a half-empty flute of champagne, scrolling through her messages, trying to find the angle. I imagined Odessa still trying to soften the optics, still using phrases like misunderstanding and family dynamics. And Wallace? Probably already speaking with the family's legal counsel, trying to figure out how much control they really had left. The answer was simple: None. At 8:55 p.m., Alma had hand-delivered the envelopes. At 9:02, my inbox confirmed delivery. By 9:10, I was no longer the one being spoken over. They could keep the name. I kept the legacy. And they would learn, slowly, painfully, that those two were never the same. I closed the folder, set it back on the shelf, and returned to my kitchen to clean the glass. This wasn't about winning. This was about clarity. 10 minutes later, I stepped back outside and ordered an Uber. Not to go home, but to meet Alma for tea. We had work to do. On the drive, the driver glanced at me in the mirror and asked, "Big night?" I smiled, faint but sure. "It was the night I stopped apologizing for being the author," I said. When I arrived, Alma was already waiting at the table with her usual chamomile and that same yellow legal pad she always brought when things were about to shift. She slid the pad toward me. "What's next?" she asked. I didn't hesitate. "We build something that doesn't need their name to stand." "And them?" I shook my head. "They'll be footnotes." Alma sipped her tea, nodding with a kind of calm only lawyers and survivors seem to master. The next morning, a courier delivered a thick manila envelope to Wallace's law office. Inside was a summary of all usage violations tied to the Clarity Foundation name. Odessa received a similar packet at home. No calls came, no protests, just quiet submission. Sometimes silence doesn't mean defeat. Sometimes it's what happens when people finally realize they've lost control. As I sat at my desk that afternoon, filtering through new grant applications, I felt no victory, just alignment. And that was enough. 3 days after the gala, I opened the curtains in my sunroom just wide enough to let the light spill across the hardwood floor. Chicago had entered that quiet kind of winter where the city holds its breath between wind gusts and people choose silence over conversation in elevators. I didn't mind. I'd had enough words for a lifetime. No emails from Wallace, no missed calls from Odessa, not even a passive-aggressive group text from Marla. Their silence didn't sting anymore. It just confirmed the shift. I wasn't a secret, but I wasn't a possession either. I wasn't punishing them by staying quiet. I was just choosing not to be dragged back into their orbit. At 9:07 a.m., a soft knock came at my door. No signature required. The courier handed me a box, barely larger than a book, brown paper faded at the corners. The return address was old, Florida. The name scribbled in a frail but unmistakable hand, Eulalie Sibel. It had been postmarked 22 months ago. Inside was a small velvet pouch, a folded note, and a single gold pendant on a chain. The pendant was worn at the edges, like it had been touched too many times. On the back, in tiny engraving, E.S. Speak. The letter, written in the same graceful cursive my grandmother had used to sign birthday cards and correction letters alike, was only 3 paragraphs long. You were never meant to follow. You were meant to disturb the silence they're comfortable in. That's why they'll fear you. And that's why you must speak anyway. My fingers closed around the pendant. Not to wear it. To know it had survived time and shipping delays and everything in between. It didn't feel like jewelry. It felt like permission. She must have written it, knowing I'd open it when I needed it most. She'd always seen through the noise, even when the rest of them looked past me. Eulalie had told me once, back when I was still too small to fight back, "They'll mistake your stillness for softness. Let them. But never let them mistake it for surrender." That day, I didn't go online. I didn't answer any messages. I just let the silence stretch. The next morning, Sarah, my assistant, called just after 10. "Are you sitting down?" I laughed gently. "Should I be?" "You're everywhere." I leaned back in the chair, eyes half closed. "Define everywhere." "The clip. The one from the gala. You, standing under the lights. Marla behind you, trying to redirect the attention. You didn't even speak. You just looked. The whole room saw it." She paused. "You didn't flinch, Euphemia. People noticed." I didn't respond. She filled the silence. One of the captions trending says, "She didn't argue, she arrived." That one made me smile, just slightly. It was never about going viral, but something about that line, clean, clear, and done without a microphone, felt like vindication that didn't need gloating. Later that afternoon, I received a call from a donor out of Santa Fe, a soft-voiced man with a long history in education reform. "I didn't know about your work before," he said, "but I watched that video 3 times. I'd like to fund your next site personally. Not for the gala. For me. For the work." That night, before closing my office, I opened a drawer and pulled out the photo Loren had printed for me. He'd dropped it off quietly, no note, just a manila folder slipped under my door. It was the moment during Marla's speech, where I turned my head just slightly when I realized what she was doing and didn't react, didn't cry, didn't protest, just saw it for what it was and stood my ground. I taped the photo to the inside of my office door. Below it, in red ink, I wrote, "This was not the fight. This was the exit." Then I grabbed the envelope from the corner of my desk. Tickets to New Mexico. Site visit scheduled. Team already assembling. I wasn't running from anything. I was planting something new. When people ask me now if I talk to my family, I don't lie. I just say, no longer necessary. They always nod like they understand. Because usually they do. There are things you can rebuild. And there are things you outgrow. They may never say my name with affection again, but they'll never use it without permission.